When you're graphing a sine or a cosine function, you have to understand all of the transformation rules that are applied to a cosine or a sine graph in trigonometry. I like to connect them to the transformations of the family of functions that we study in algebra. They are very similar to those, but go by a different name in trigonometry. Starting with A. A has two roles in terms of transformations. It is your vertical dilation, but it also takes care of a negative A as a reflection in your graph, particularly a reflection across the y-axis. Excuse me, a reflection across the x-axis for A. Now, the C value, when it is negative, that is a reflection across the y-axis, but it also covers a dilation, the value of C, a dilation horizontally. H is usually taking care of your translations. That is a translation in terms of transformation, and it moves your graph left to right horizontally. K is a vertical translation. It moves your graph vertically up or down. Connecting this to trigonometry, A is what's referred to as your amplitude. And in application problems, we connected this to the radius of a circle. In an application problem we've focused on in trig. The C is used to find the period of the function you're working with, whether it's a sine or a cosine. The H is what we refer to as a phase shift. So it is still a horizontal translation, but just called by a different name, a phase shift. And we refer to the K as the midline. That is the midline of our function. So just to kind of look at it without a graph and kind of see an example of how you connect these pieces, you would see this function f equals 1/2 sine of 3x plus 1. If you're looking for the midline, you want to again connect it to the k value, which is on the end of the function. You always want to write it in the form of an equation because it is a line. So in this case, you'd write y equals 1. For your amplitude, that would be your a value. I would always encourage students to always take the absolute value of whatever the a value is to ensure that you're just measuring distance. On a graph, amplitude is pretty much measured distance from the midline to the maximum point or the midline to the minimum point. There's no deeming of it being negative or positive in terms of listing it. The period is found through an equation that we like to use that looks like this. A standard period of any cosine or sine graph is 2 pi radians. To find that period, you would divide that by whatever the c value is in your equation. So in this context, because c is the coefficient of x, so it should always be the number that's directly in front of x, that would be 3 in this case. So if I replace c with 3, my period would be 2 pi over 3. So if I think about that, I know that 2 pi over 3 on a unit circle is equivalent to 120 degrees in quadrant 2. That is a third. That's a third of my circumference of my circle. So if I think about this graph and how it's going to look, horizontally, it's going to compress by a third. So it's going to repeat every 2 pi over 3 units. Whereas phase shift, we talk about the last thing, there is no h value. I would know it if I saw x plus or x minus a value, which I don't have here in the parentheses of my equation. So I'm going to put none to represent the phase shift here, and that would be the appropriate thing to do. So that is how you want to list the transformations when you're talking about it in terms of trig functions.